Right now, we talk a little bit about the New Orleans Saints. And, of course, the Saints are set to play Monday night against the Chargers, and I would assume that's going to be here, given the circumstances of the storm now. But joining us to touch on that, among other things, about the New Orleans Saints, from the Athletic NOLA, does an outstanding job covering the Saints, and, oh, by the way, is a fine author as well. How about that? It's great to have Jeff Duncan with us, and, Jeff, always a pleasure. Welcome to the show.
Ken, how you doing tonight, man? And thanks for having me on tonight.
Oh, listen, it's great to have you. And first and foremost, I started reading the book, so I wanted to touch on that first and foremost to talk about that because I think it's a pretty intriguing read. Talk about how you got the idea and tell everybody about the book as well.
Well, look, I'm really excited about it. You can pre-order it right now and get it in your hands right now online. The actual official release of the book, which is titled, I guess I should tell the title, it's Peyton and Breeze, the men who built the greatest offense in NFL history. I make that argument in the book. But it's really a three-pronged book. In a lot of ways, it shines a light on Drew Brees and on Sean Payton, and then their collaboration here in New Orleans, the historic partnership and very unique, uncommon tenure that they've had. I don't think in the history of the NFL we've seen a quarterback of Drew Brees' brilliance paired with an offensive play caller like Sean Payton, someone that played the position. When you think about the great quarterbacks in NFL history, none of them have played for a coach that also played quarterback. So I think that's one of the things that's made this unique. And as you know, Ken, Sean and Drew both wrote books after the hurricane and after winning the Super Bowl in 2009, and really nothing about them since then. Well, a lot's happened in the last decade, as all Saints fans know, and I had a chance to spend a lot of time with both of them and get a chance to document this last 10, 12 years of their tenure here in New Orleans. It was a lot of fun.
Got it. Well, listen, it's special, and I'm enjoying the read already. So, and I think that's a legitimate argument to be made, by the way. So I think you're on spot there. And speaking of being on spot, you reported this morning about at least the potential for the Saints relocating practice and even the game, if necessary, to Indianapolis. What's the latest on that? It certainly doesn't seem logical or feasible at this point, given the data we have and the direction of the storm.
Yeah, I just reported that they are staying put. The team informed the staff and the players not too long ago that they were not going to have to leave. And, the storm weakening, I think, over the Yucatan Peninsula, also jogging a little more west of us. Unfortunately for our friends over west of us, it looks like they're going to get the brunt of the storm. But hopefully it'll continue to weaken. And, by the time it makes landfall, it will not be a threat as the way it was over Mexico. But New Orleans, of course, looked like it was going to be right in the heart of that model 48 hours ago. And, of course, team officials, NFL officials have to have contingency plans. And they were working around the clock to figure out what they could do, and were making plans to head up and evacuate to Indianapolis to conduct practices. I think they would have come back on Sunday and played the game here, but the last resort was going to be that if the storm really hit here and caused a lot of damage, they were going to have to play the game up on Monday night in Indianapolis. They'd already made arrangements for that, but thankfully, none of that's going to have to happen.
No, indeed, that would have been a distraction. They would have handled it well, like they've handled everything else. After all, it is 2020, so expect the worst, hope for the best. I mean, that's pretty much what we're dealing with here. And the season has kind of been that theme, too, because right away, you had the automatic concerns about Davenport, which is, as we know now, one of the primary reasons they went so hard after a very coveted defensive end who was a free agent, who was costly. They tried a creative measure to get him. That didn't happen with Jadeveon Clowney. And, of course, he's a good player, not a great player, but now we have a pretty good idea why with the Davenport situation. And now where Davenport's concerned, we don't get the injury report until tomorrow. Now he's got a toe problem. So and this is really starting to be a concern. I like what the Saints have done to build inside out. I think that's the right way to go and the way to win with all the heavy investments they've made in their offensive and defensive line. But then you got to hit on them, too. And right about now, there has to be at least some trepidation about the future of Davenport and has to be some concern about the future of Rankins only because of the injuries. We knew he was a pretty good player before those injuries set in, but clearly that's been a factor as well. Let's talk about that dynamic along their defensive line.
Well, those are great observations, Ken, and I think you're spot on. Rankins has just had really bad luck with his injuries, and he does not look like the same player, unfortunately, that he was a couple of years ago when he really was looking like a Pro Bowl caliber interior defensive lineman. And with him being, his contract expires after this year, unless he really comes on and produces, I think this could be his last year in New Orleans simply because of, they can't pay everybody, right? They've already paid Mike Thomas. Alvin Kamara just got a big deal. They're going to pay Ryan Ramczyk, of course. Probably going to pay Marshawn Lattimore. So some people are going to be caught up in the numbers game. And the fact that they already have David Onyemata under contract in the interior defensive line, I think that probably spells the end of Sheldon Rankins here. Davenport is just an enigma to me. The concern you would have of moving on from him at some point is that he goes somewhere else and blossoms, a la like Akeem Hicks, right? You let a guy get out of the building and he ends up fulfilling the potential somewhere else. That sometimes happens with these big men. He's had an odd assortment of injuries, but at some point, Sean Payton's favorite line, right, is, I have to see it. And I think the fans feel the same way. At some point, we have to see all this potential that we hear about with Marcus Davenport. We have to see it come to fruition on the field.
Sure. They made a sizable investment. Another guy that comes to mind along those lines, he wasn't the investment, but a similar dynamic was Rob Ninkovich. He was a talented guy who was hurt a lot, and they could never get him on the field enough to find that potential, got away, and he went on and became a heck of a player for a Super Bowl franchise.
Yeah, it's a great observation. And sometimes these defensive linemen, offensive linemen, I really admire the way the Saints have built this team. You mentioned it earlier, inside out. I think it's one of the more underrated factors or aspects of Sean Payton's tenure. I mean, I think a lot of people get bedazzled by the high-flying offense and the passing game. But as you know and I know, this team is built in the trenches. I mean, the reason they've been really dominant the last few years has been both their lines are very good. They're very deep. They don't drop off much along the defensive line at all when they go to their second team. And their offensive line has proven this year again that they've got depth there and can line up with anybody. And I know that's something that the organization is invested in. They did it again this year in the draft. They understand there's only so many big men on this earth that can move at the NFL caliber level. And I think it's very smart to make their investments there and try and find perimeter players somewhere else.
Well, they doubled down on Andrus Peat. That was a move that had some people scratching their heads, not because he's been a bad player, but he hasn't been the kind of player that was worth the investment they made. He's been a solid player, would be the right word, and certainly versatile, but never that guy per se. And, of course, now he's hurt again. And based on what we saw, they don't tell you about these injuries. In all likelihood, we're not going to see him for a while.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that. I was really puzzled by that signing. I think that might have been one that they would like to have back, but I think they felt like there was not much else out there on the market. They knew they were probably going to move on from Larry Warford, and they probably didn't want to have two open spots along the interior. But I don't know about you, Kim, but I thought they fared pretty well last week with Easton and Cesar Ruiz at the guard spots. Eric McCoy had a dominant game at center. I think they're okay there in the interior line and can bring Pete back whenever. I actually heard he might be back this week or at least next week.
Wow.
So I think, again, the Saints are fortunate. Where they could use Pete, I think, is that flexibility that he brings to the table when a Ramczyk goes down like he did last week, and you can slide him over to tackle, and then you have some depth, along the interior line. It gives you flexibility and versatility there with Pete healthy. But, of course, he's been down now for a couple of weeks, and I don't know when he'll be back.
Visiting with Jeff Duncan, the Athletic NOLA, 260-1061 to join us. With regard to the most popular conversation thus far this year, it's surrounded Drew Brees, one of the subjects of your book. And I just look, everybody's entitled to his or her opinion, and I respect all opinions. I truly do. But I've just absolutely been, befuddled by the constant narrative that he's done. He can't throw the ball anymore. He can't get the ball up the field. He should have retired, and the whole deal. I don't know. Look, he had one game where he clearly missed opportunities. He did miss some short balls that you never see him miss in the first two games, but that's not been the case the last two times out, and certainly he was deadly accurate in the last game that he played. The interception was a tip ball, not his fault, and he was able to get the ball into the intermediate range. He still hasn't gotten it deep, but he's been effective. Number one, he's by far the best option they have. Number two, he's still quite good. And number three, yes, you can go the distance with him. So I never bought that narrative for a second. I sense you certainly didn't either.
Not at all. I mean, I felt like that was sort of a lazy narrative by the national media. They might have glanced at a game and saw him throwing a couple dump off or check down passes, and a lot of people made the assumption that he wasn't throwing deep because he can't throw deep, and that's a totally different statement than him electing to not go deep because there's nothing open deep. And I think that's what's been happening. The way defenses have been playing the Saints, they're forcing everything underneath. And Drew Brees, as you know, is never going to force anything. He always is going to take what the defense gives him. And I think he could have a couple times found a guy that might have been open. But early on, I think the whole offense was just out of sync, including Drew. And it took him a few games to get back into rhythm, to start developing that synchronicity with some of the new receivers, especially Emmanuel Sanders. And we're seeing that offense start to round into form the way we've seen it the past few years. And they got that running game going against the Lions. And when they do that, it just makes everything else work. Drew's play-action passing becomes almost automatic, and defense is really kind of helpless to stop this team. And now that looks like Mike Thomas is going to be back this week, I just think this offense is ready to take off again. And anyone saying that Drew Brees can't put the ball deep, well, I just think it's nonsense, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think that's a good word. I think you described it best. I was searching for the right word, but I agree with you. I've just been shaking my head. I can't believe that I've been hearing this continuously. And look, I've got nothing against Tom Brady. To the contrary, I think he's the best that's ever played the game. And yet the narrative about him has been totally different. I've watched this and listened to this, and it's like, oh, look at him. You put him in a different place. Man, he can throw it deep. He's got the fountain of youth. Look, I've seen him throw a couple of pick sixes. I don't know about you. But that said, he's got really good players around him, and he's playing well. Brees is going to play well. And the best thing about the Brees situation without Michael Thomas is that it has given a chance for Traquan Smith to play that position and run those routes that Thomas is running. Also, it's given a chance for Sanders to work out his timing with him. So now you've got that, and you bring Thomas back, and guess what? You've got yourself a smorgasbord of talent to utilize.
Yeah, I really believe this team's potential. We all know how talented they are, and I've been a little mystified at the slow start, both sides of the ball, especially defensively in the secondary, because the secondary looks so strong during camp. It played so well, but maybe it's because they were able to hold and get away with defensive pass interference without officials in practice. But this team is probably on paper the most talented team the Saints have ever had. They've never had this many Pro Bowl, all-pro players on the roster at one time. We know the coaching staff is good, so the potential is there, and they've just underachieved the first three games. I think even the game they won against Tampa, they didn't play all that well. Tampa made a lot of mistakes, and I think they're going to incrementally continue to get better. They got a stretch here with the schedule I think is manageable, and I think they had a chance to go down to Tampa in Week 8, where they'll be 5-2, and that'll be a huge showdown against the Bucs and Tom Brady.
Yeah, I think it's shaping up that way. I'm not going to dismiss Carolina. They've gotten to 2-2, but they don't have McCaffrey. Their receivers are nothing to really point home about. Teddy Bridgewater's done a solid job for them thus far, but I don't see them being in the class of the first two teams. And then the Falcons, I don't know for the life of me, I got nothing against Dan Quinn, but I have no idea how he survived this long. I really don't.
I don't either. I really don't. I mean, he almost was fired at the end of last year. Some of my contacts over there said it came down to the last game, and Arthur Blank really kind of got hesitant and didn't pull the trigger. And this start has just been a debacle, and it just feels like the team is not buying in anymore to Dan Quinn. They've got a lot of talent on that team, Ken, and certainly offensively can match up with anybody in the league. And they've invested a lot of money on high draft picks and free agents, and I just don't see the rewards or any return on that investment for Arthur Blank. They got that big new stadium. He invested hundreds of millions of dollars in it, and it's not sold out. I don't see how he can continue to be patient with not only Dan Quinn but also Tom Dimitroff, who's a well-respected GM. But I haven't seen a lot of very sound moves out of Dimitroff to improve that roster. It just looks like the same team that they've had the last couple of years.
Yeah, offensively, a quarterback that's solid to very good, receivers that can get it done in a heartbeat. I don't know about Gurley. Maybe the jury's out on him. He's not the guy we saw 2 or 3 years ago, but they certainly went that way when the Rams went elsewhere. So they've got talent, but I'm not sure that they're a real threat. About 2 minutes left with Jeff Duncan. As you look at the NFC right now, boy, it's really kind of a hard conference to handicap because the 49ers, as bad off as the Saints are injury-wise, the 49ers have been decimated, and they're, when they're healthy, obviously very good. Seattle's a real deal. They're a very good team that Green Bay shows. They came here and won, and Aaron Rodgers is playing like a man possessed, like a madman, and he's got a right to feel that way, and he certainly played that way. And then, of course, you got other teams that have not achieved. So a lot of people thought Dallas would. That hasn't happened. Same thing as Atlanta. They can score, but they can't stop anybody. So how do you see the NFC right now? Where would you look at for the top 3 or 4 contenders?
Well, I think you named them all. I think Green Bay certainly is playing the best football right now in the league on both sides of the ball. That's why I actually was encouraged by the Saints' play in that game, even though they lost. If Taysom Hill doesn't fumble that read option, I think they have a chance to win that game and didn't play their A game against a team that's arguably playing the best in the league. I just think Aaron Rodgers is on fire right now. He's playing with such confidence and leading that team. So I think Green Bay and Seattle, of course, unbeaten. And I really believe at some point San Francisco, even though I know they're banged up right now, I think they're going to end up being in the mix. They're 2-2 like the Saints, but there's a lot of talent there. They've been kind of surviving and treading water. I mean, you mentioned their injuries. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo hasn't played the last few weeks. They lost Bosa. They've had more injuries, I think, than anybody in the league, and some of those guys are going to be coming back soon. So I think they'll be back in the mix. But it's going to be Tampa Bay and New Orleans, like everyone expected in the NFC South. And I think the Saints are getting their act together and have to be considered the favorites in the division. Even if they lose that game down at Tampa, I still think that they have to be considered the favorites.
Yeah, I still feel that's correct. The injuries have so much to do with it, and the Saints have had their rash early, so you hope that works itself out, and the bye week will help them. You'd love to have that bye week in midseason, but as it turned out this year, it's probably not a bad place at all for it to occur. So we'll see what transpires. You can follow him on Twitter at @JeffDuncan_. Subscribe to The Athletic. The Athletic NOLA does a great job with a lot of guys that we have on these shows that do a terrific job day in and day out. And, of course, Jeff, you can watch him on Fox 8 as well, among the many enterprises. And last but not least, tell everybody about that book once more because I'm enjoying what I'm reading thus far, Jeff.
Thanks, Ken. That means a lot. It actually will be on the bookshelves next week, October 13th. You'll be able to buy it at any of the local booksellers, and you can order it online right now at Amazon or Triumph Books. And I'll have a few, if you go to my Facebook page or the Breeze and Peyton Facebook page, I'm posting all the local book signings. I'll be at Octavia Books and Garden District Books in the Uptown neighborhood over the next couple of weeks if some people want to come out and get a chance to get a signed copy in person.
And we'll continue to pass on that information to everybody so that we get the message out. Jeff Duncan, thank you so much for the time. A real pleasure. And listen, we'll talk again soon. You hear?
Thanks for having me on, Ken. I really appreciate it. Have a great night and a great weekend, buddy.
You too. It's Jeff Duncan of The Athletic. NOLA